Hi, everyone. Yes, if you could let us know in the chat where you're watching from, that'd be great. I would love that. University of Kansas. Awesome. Anyone else? Philly. Hello, Philly. Welcome. Utah. Awesome. I love knowing that we're just all over the country. Florida. Hi. That is where I'm from. So cool. Welcome in. We're gonna give it maybe one more minute and then we will start. Ooh, watching from Honolulu. Welcome. Welcome. Hello, OCA Greater Phoenix. Welcome in. All right, San Francisco Bay Area. Awesome. We are having a bit of technical difficulties on one end, so just keep letting me know where you are. and then we can get started. I'm also playing music if that's okay with everyone. I hope it's not too loud. To kind of just bring us into Native Hawaiian-Pacific Islander vibes. Oh, can no one hear the music? No one can hear it? Oh, I think it's because I stopped sharing. Okay, wait. Okay, hi OCA Sacramento. Let me see if I can. How about, oops. How about now? Can you hear this? I hope you can hear it. Awesome. Hopefully. I'm just trying to bring island vibes in before we get started. It's a little quiet. I can turn it up gladly. I love. If anyone knows Kaloakai, I think he just got married, but he's great. I love him. Sorry, folks. We're just having a bit of technical difficulties, and then we will get started. So I'm just gonna check in. Does anyone know this song or recognize? Oh, President of Apollo Sacramento. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, you got your master's and PhD from UH Manoa. Ah, awesome. You're going back to Honolulu in August. That's great. All right. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can just share it myself. Okay. I think we're having technical difficulties, so I'm going to try to share this myself. 1 second. All right. Awesome. So thank you everybody for coming. My name is Lady Marie Balilan. I am OCA National's Senior Chapter and Membership Development Associate. This is the second part of our four webinar series, history webinar series that we have been doing. Our last one focused on Vincent Chin. So our theme is on AAPI hate crimes in history. So our last one was on Vincent Chin, and now we will be focusing on, oh, can y'all not see me? Goodness gracious, these technical difficulties today. Can everyone see me? You can't see me? Oh my gosh. How about now? Oh my goodness. You saw the logo and just a black screen. Oh, this is not the time to be messing with me. Logo and then black screen. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see. If I share it, you can hear me. Okay. If I share my screen, let's see what happens. How about now? Can you see me at all? Okay, you can see me now. Or can you see the screen? You see me on the sides. Awesome. Okay. So this is our second, awesome, thank God. This is our second webinar. We will be talking about culture colonized. We'll be focusing on the annexation of Hawaii in 1898. So we'll be focusing on Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander cultures, and but specifically the annexation of Hawaii today. I do want to, and then we'll also have a, we have our speakers and panelists tonight who are here. I will be introducing them later on. And then we'll have a resources moment to talk about what we can do for our communities. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end, just so that everyone is aware of what's going on. So I also do want to make a disclaimer that I personally do not identify as someone with a Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander background, but I do believe in sharing the beautiful culture and tragic history that this community has had to endure. There will be Native Hawaiian words that I will do my best to pronounce properly, but please excuse me if I do not say them correctly. We also do recognize that there are many parts to the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander narrative that include nearly 20 US recognized communities with their own languages, traditions, cultures, and stories. But tonight, we'll be talking about the annexation of Hawaii in 1898 to lay an informational foundation as to how the United States and its government view and treat the community as a whole that will hopefully encourage folks to look deeper into the entirety of Hawaii and Pacifica's vast stories. So let us begin. And you can all hear me and hear and see me okay, right? Sorry for all the technical difficulties, folks. Awesome. So we're going to start off with life before the colonizers came. So proto-historic period. So proto is original. So this is the life the Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiians lived before the colonizers came. They had a social system that was organized around communal subsistence production in which large ohana or extended families engaged in cooperative work and share the fruits of their labor. Ruling chiefs emerged in every district on each island and assumed stewardship over the land. They developed an infrastructure of irrigation networks, roads, and fish ponds to enable the intensification of the production of food and basic necessities to support a rapidly expanding population. 4 distinct chiefdoms ruled by 4 ali'i nui or high chiefs were including Hawaii, Maui, Oahu, and Kauai. They competed for control over districts and islands through inter-island alliances and marriages, religious rituals, and military conquest. Eventually, in the late 18th century, it was possible for all the chiefdoms to be ruled by one paramount chief that would consolidate and govern the chiefdoms as a federated inter-island kingdom. The Kingdom of Hawaii was united under King Kamehameha I in 1810. Next, we're going to talk about Aloha Aina, which is also known as the love of the land. So with Aloha Aina, It had land that symbolized life, and in pre-Christian tradition, mana, or power. This was the belief that the spirits of the Kanaka Maoli returned to the ancestral land. Not only was the land loved for its resources, but for the idea of it being alive and a breathing entity. Furthermore, aloha aina was greatly emphasized during the Hawaiian overthrow as a form of identity for the Kanaka Maoli and their retention to the culture that was quickly being commercialized by the annexationists. And lastly, aloha aina signifies the hard work and dedication of the Kanaka Maoli. The effort needed to provide for the families and to farm on the island is metaphorical in the Kanaka Maoli's resilience in protesting the illegal annexation effects of settler colonialism. Oh, there's something misspelled, but sorry about that. So we're moving on to the arrival. So on January 18th, 1778, Captain Cook sails past Oahu and lands in Kauai on January 20, 2 days later, thus beginning the Hawaiian exploration. Missionaries arrived on the island on April 4th, 1820. And initially, missionaries wanted to save the Kanaka Maoli by spreading religion. This was a savior complex hidden by imperialism and colonialism. After finding resources, they decided that they wanted to transition into settling onto the island and exploit these resources. In 1835, the first successful sugarcane plantation was started by Ladd and Company at Koloa, Kauai. It introduced the sugar plantation industry and indentured servant contracts with other Asian countries. Sugar plantations were important during this time due to the US Civil War that affected the sugar industry in the South. Hawaii was the next land source. It also introduced the system of free labor to emancipate the natives from the miserable system of chief labor, setting up a capitalist system. This also stripped the aloha aina, or the love the Kanaka Maoli held for the land. The spiritual connection between the Native Hawaiians and the resources that they used were common in many island societies. I also want to mention, it's not pictured, but there in 1875 was the Reciprocity Treaty, which granted commercial privileges to the United States along with control over Pearl Harbor. On July 6th, 1887 was the Bayonet Constitution. This was when missionaries gained positions in government and eventually created the Bayonet Constitution to limit the power of the Kanaka Maoli. The political power increased as sugar plantations expanded and haoles, or non-native Hawaiian, especially a white person, gained traction in government. King Kalakaua signed this into law at gunpoint, which is why it is called the Bayonet Constitution. Guns belonged to the militia made up of white settlers called the Honolulu Rifles. This limited the power of the monarchy in Hawaii. On July 30th, 1889 was the first Wilcox Rebellion. This was a rebellion that was organized by Robert Wilcox from Maui to undo the Bayonet Constitution and reinstate the power to King Kalakaua. By the end of the rebellion, Wilcox lost 7 men, some resources say 8, and a dozen wounded. Most rebels received 1 year imprisonment. Wilcox was tried for treason and acquitted by an all-Hawaiian jury. 2 years later, in 1891, King Kalakaua died in San Francisco and Liliuokalani ascended the Hawaiian throne. On January 17th, 1893, only 2 years after the Wilcox Rebellion, Queen Liliuokalani was imprisoned and overthrown by American sugar planters and missionary descendants with the support of the US Marines. So this goes into now controlling the land of Hawaii. In 1893, President Grover Cleveland rejected the provisional government's proposed treaty to annex Hawaii. On July 4th, 1894 to 1898, Sanford Ballard Dole assumed the presidency of the provisional government in place of the later Republic of Hawaii. On January 6th to 9th, 1895, there was another Wilcox Rebellion. At this time, Wilcox and others successfully occupied the government buildings in their attempt to unseat the provisional government, but later arrested by the opposition's enforcement. In 1896, Queen Liliuokalani attempted to recover the crown lands that were seized by the annexationist Republic of Hawaii. She was the leader of the Stand Firm, or Onipa'a, movement that fought against the annexation of Hawaii. She met with President Grover Cleveland to negotiate. And in November 1896, President William McKinley, the president after Cleveland, was more inclined to annex Hawaii and further the efforts of accepting the island into statehood. In June 1897, McKinley signed a treaty of annexation with the representatives of the Republic of Hawaii. And now we're going into the retaliation. In 1897, the Hui Aloha Aina for women and the Hui Aloha Aina for men, the Hui Kalai Aina and Queen Liliuokalani formed a coalition and signed a treaty that opposed annexation efforts. November 20th, 1897, 4 delegates chosen from the executive committee of the 3 Hui were sent to Washington, D.C. to present the petitions to President McKinley and the U.S. Congress. Later that year, in December 6th of 1897, the delegates arrived on the day the Senate opened and briefly met with Queen Liliuokalani. In February 27th, 1897, I'm not sure, I think it was 1898, they left Washington and brought the votes down from 58 to 46 for the annexation of Hawaii. The delegates believed that this would be enough to have the treaty fail. And so we go into the illegal annexation. On July 12th, 1898, the annexation of Hawaii was accomplished through the Newlands Resolution. This was a joint resolution proposed by President McKinley, the Republic of Hawaii, and other pro-annexationists that required a simple majority in both houses in the chamber to approve the annexation of Hawaii. Because this vote happened during the Spanish-American War, all efforts against the annexation were dismissed for strategy and need for resources. On August 6, 1898, the 3 Hui protested the resolution and sent a document to the U.S. Minister Harold Sewall to highlight the strong opposition of the U.S. involvement in controlling and annexing the island. This is also not pictured, but we wanted to also mention the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920. Originally conceived as a native rehabilitation project, which would allot 200,000 acres of land with a 99-year lease provision to those who qualified as Native Hawaiian, lands were formerly part of the Crown and government lands of the Kingdom of Hawaii. And in 1946, Hawaii was inscribed on the UN list of non-self-governing territories. And another thing that we wanted to be sure that we noted was that in November 20th, 1950, Edward L. Bernays connected the strategy of utilizing civil rights issues to the movement for statehood. Since Hawaii's population is ethnically diverse, admitting it into statehood would prove that America was quote unquote not racist. Hawaii statehood was important in combating the portrayal of the US as a white supremacist imperialist nation. Bernays saw Hawaii's admission as a US state as a critical weapon in the ideological arms race with the Soviet Union. This was an important political and strategic point that pushed for the statehood of Hawaii. And finally, on August 21, 1959, the US admitted Hawaii as a state of the Union. And now we've come into the reparations portion. So these are ways that the US has tried to give back to Hawaii for what they've done. So in the 1970s, the Congress enacted numerous special provisions of law for the benefit of Native Hawaiians in the areas of health, education, labor, and housing. They recognized essentially that this special relationship exists. They also extended the Native Hawaiians the same rights and privileges included in the Native American Programs Act of 1974. In 1993, almost 100 years after the annexation, the Apology Resolution was passed by Congress. This apology resolution acknowledges US complicity in the overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani and the constitutional monarchy. The resolution defined Native Hawaiian inclusively, meaning as any individual who was a descendant of the Aboriginal people who prior to 1778 occupied and exercised sovereignty in the area that now constitutes the state of Hawaii. And at the end of this document, there is a disclaimer that states nothing contained can be used to settle a case against the US. So basically saying that even if they apologized and recognized that it was illegal for them to take the land that Hawaii or Hawaii or anyone else can't use it as evidence in court to try and get the land back basically meaning that their apology was just for show and meaningless in regards to actual reparations. And so this brings us to where we are now. I'm gonna stop sharing and hopefully you can see me after this. Please let me know if you can see me or not. Oh, awesome, we can see me, awesome. Obviously there's so much here that we need to unpack. There are a lot of events that have transpired that maybe some of you have not known or heard of, or really known or learned about. And that's the important thing about these history webinars. So with that, I wanted to bring on my panelists who are all experienced in their own backgrounds of contributing to the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. And so if my panelists can turn on their cameras, that would be great. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, welcome. I'm gonna let all of you introduce yourselves and then we can go into the next part. Alika, if you wanted to start.
Aloha nui mai kako. My name is Alika Bourgette. I am Kanaka Maoli, and I'm also a third-year PhD candidate at the University of Washington here in Seattle. My dissertation work looks at the way Native Hawaiian communities, particularly on the waterfront in Kaka'ako and Waikiki, continued to live by aloha aina, and a lot of the concepts we just talked about in brief well into the 20th century. I'm looking mostly at like the 1920s. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alika. Kat, if you wanted to go next.
Hi, yes, Hafaday, good morning, everyone. My name is Kaplan Zalon. I am a 2019 graduate of the University of Washington, where I studied American Ethnic Studies. I currently live in Saipan in Northern Mariana Islands, born and raised here to Filipino migrant worker families. Currently now, since returning to the islands, I now work for the Saipan District Office of the U.S. House of Representatives. So thank you for having me today.
And lastly, Lydia.
Hi, good afternoon. Talofa and Malole. My name is Lydia Faitalia. My community also calls me La Faitale. I am Samoan and Tongan. I'm currently tuning in from the ancestral homelands of the Cowlitz tribe, who I like to raise my hands to in gratitude as the original stewards of these lands. So thank you very much for hosting our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander people. And it is my promise that I strengthen community relations across our community. So thank you, Cowlitz tribe. I am here as a Washington State Commissioner on the Pacific Asian CAPAA Commissions, and I am also here as a community leader and an organizer, but also as a program manager at United Nations of All Tribes. So thank you for having me. I am excited to sit and talk stories with you all. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm not sure if my video is not working. Oh, can we not see me now? I'm just gonna keep going. It's fine. Everyone, after going through the history and kind of going a little bit deeper, can you tell me about like your thoughts? What was going through your mind? And if any emotions or if there was anything deeper that was brought to the surface. What is something that you experienced? Anyone's welcome to go first.
Thank you for that great insightful question. No, I mean, going through it, it kind of allows us to think of that history of colonization as both quite longer than 1898 and also ongoing to the present. And the 1993 apology, as you kind of like so rightfully like exposed, is really just an opening for, I guess, further dispossession on behalf of the United States in the name of Hawaiians, rather than providing any reparations or even restoring sovereignty in a nominal way. It really just codifies and legalizes that relationship that Native Hawaiians like myself really do not acknowledge or do not want. So yeah, it's really difficult to listen and then think of the multi-generational ongoing resistance that's been happening since missionaries arrived in the 1820s. So I mean, it's really important that we highlight all of those generations of struggle.
Thank you, Alika. Awesome. Does anyone else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, I think something that stood out to me was kind of looking at how this method of well, colonialism was slow but kind of focused, right? It lasted throughout a century, and then when they kind of got their feet in the 1890s, it kind of went quick. The whole process of annexation, trying to get the land from the peoples, and from kind of the perspective of living here in the Marianas, it makes you think about kind of taking caution as they kind of make their way in this way, because it's still something that I think out here and where I am that we still really think about, in the sense that we know that contemporary political forces come up, and this adds as pressure towards national convenience. Oftentimes, it's these historically excluded communities that bear the brunt when that happens.
Definitely.
I mean, I guess for me as a I don't like to use the word ally to my brothers and sisters on this call, but as a collective Oceanic people, Pacifica, right? Our annexation with the South Pacific specifically, and I'm speaking from a lived experience from Samoa and Tonga. Tonga is the last reigning monarchy, but as I think of my brother here that is focused on Native Hawaiian, and I stand in solidarity with that movement of sovereignty. You think about land commodification and what you just read earlier, lady, it's still emerging. And I think of this story for those of you students and academics that are on this call, Dismembering La Hui by Jonathan Osorio, how he talks about language and how language is a constant use of it's our way. And I love that Alika used Native Hawaiian words because it's his way of decolonizing, right? And so I love that, brother, that you did that. But I also want to put it in the context that this is not history, it's still going on, right? The oppression of our people are still going on in different levels, on the community level, the national level. And I just want to make sure that all the students and all of the listeners that are on here, that you really think about positionality wherever you are positioned, and how these lands have been commodified and come about, and how colonization and how you also, how myself has played into it. And what does that look like for us to take up space in these different realms, right? Whether it's government, is academia, how do we contribute to this movement in raising these concerns in academia specifically, because this seems like an academic call? How do we raise these concerns? And so I just want to lift up Alika's work and a lot of our Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, that you have folks here that will help you, that would help push. And so as I think about this, I think about our collective efforts with our Asian American brothers and sisters and our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, that it's important to understand each other, because we're relational people, and when we understand each other, relation to relation, nation to nation, we are better at this collective movement of sustaining our own rights and our own lands. So I just want to add to that. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. I think it's important to know, when you talk about positionality, you know, like I'm coming from a background that doesn't really like identify as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, but I recognize that, and you know, putting in the effort. I don't want to like boast of myself, but I'm just saying, like, of like folks in general, to just like, you know, I think some folks really wonder, like, what can I do? What can I really do as someone who is not part of this, who may not even know the culture? Kat, you know, she is of Filipino background, you know, like, what can we do, you know, to make an active effort to support these communities, and like to bring in this story, to bring in the knowledge that's just not known, that's not spoken about, you know. Like, I have a feeling that maybe some folks on this, in the audience, or like maybe watching this, may not have known any of these things until tonight, until we decided to talk about it. Because it's just not taught in schools. It's not taught in US history. The realities of it, of, you know, colonization and, and imperialism and the militarization is just not spoken about. So, you know, what I think my next question is like, what can folks who are not a part of this community do actively to, you know, when you talk about positionality, like what can we actively do?
Thank you for that question. I guess I'll go ahead and start it off again. But a lot of understanding one's own position and positionality also comes to like, what do we need to do to be in good relations with the lands and water, who are also our kin? The lands and water in which we live aren't necessarily our indigenous lands and water. And like folks in Hawaii and even folks here in Coast Salish lands and waters are beginning to create languages that allow us to address those relationships we all have, because like this water, this land, it nourishes me. Like, and in return, like I have to do more than just foul its air with my, you know, with my breath. I have to take, you know, responsibility in kind. And a lot of that requires generations of knowledge that indigenous peoples do carry. So I would say one thing that we all can do, because it is a planetary struggle and a solidarities across like many spaces, is go ahead and like learn what's up going on in like, you know, indigenous communities in your area, and basically stand in community with them, see what they need, see how you can support.
I know we have a resources portion like after this part, but if anyone else wanted to add anything else before.
Yeah, for myself, I come from the position of a settler here in the Northern Marianas, right? My parents were migrant workers, and this is really the first place they've relocated to since leaving the homeland. So I think this has been a lesson that I've been trying to navigate all my life as what does it mean to be Filipino from the Northern Marianas. And I think one of the things that I've learned recently, or I've come to realize, is that a big part of it is acknowledging that while our own communities, right, like for example, the Filipino community in the Marianas, yes, we might have kind of our own needs, but I think at the end of the day, the most important thing to me is being able to really show up for the community here and also advocate for the indigenous peoples of, I think particularly for me, of the lands that I reside in, right? So going from Washington and being able to make sure that when there is, that we create the space for our indigenous community members, our colleagues or friends in these communities, and also making sure I think out here in the Marianas that we listen to kind of what their priorities are and in whatever position that we may be in to uplift those messages and those movements to put in the work and to show up for them too. A big thing for me is really, I think, just acknowledging the gift, at least to my family, that was given from the Chamorro and Carolingian people to opening up their lands to us. And I think about that every day in the work that I do, and making sure that when they need the help or when they need the voice of advocates for them, that we show up and that we educate ourselves in the way that we need to really uplift their movements. Yeah.
Awesome.
I guess for me, just to tie up to piggyback off of what Brother Alika and Sister Katrina already said, and Lady, you brought up a great point. It's not taught in history, right? It's our stories aren't taught in history for a reason. It's still part of the oppressor's plan, whatever you want to call it, but our communities are still thriving. I just want to put that out there. We're still thriving and we're still here, and we will continue to be here for generations to come. Something that I want to encourage our folks on this call, but also folks that are watching, is the importance of honoring, just like what Katrina said, honoring the First Nations or the first people of the lands in which you situated, because those are the ones furthest away from opportunity. A great example is Hawaii. We're talking about Hawaii today, right? And so if you ever, I don't know if you've all been to Hawaii, but I've been to Hawaii, and if you sit back and you watch, everybody's advocating for their own rights, but the indigenous people are kind of pushed off to the waters, right? And in these camps or whatever piece of land the government decided to throw at them that they didn't want to use. For me, there's a lot of ways that you can help our communities by beginning, one, to look around you and see how many Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians are at the table and start to invite those folks in, right, that are doing this work. Two, if you take up space at a government level, try to bring in our people. So at every level in education, push for ethnic studies, start having the conversations of more Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders at the table, because there's nothing great about community collective and moving this work when it's the communities that are the driver. And I will always say that the communities are the driver of their own history. And so we need to empower each other, and whatever that looks like, we need to get behind it and take the good, leave the bad, right? And so that's what I want to end on today with that question.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That is so true. It's so important. You talk about government, and having that representation. Katrina, you are in the Mariana Islands, and I know that you are in the office for the U.S. representatives, if that's correct. So in terms of, being in government work and being, in the Pacific Islands right now, what is that like? Do you feel anything harboring you or limiting you in relation or in comparison to like other offices, say on the mainland? What has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's so my boss is a member of Congress, but a non-voting delegate. So something I've observed in kind of the work that we've done is I think number one is just a lot of respect for our member of Congress here in the Marianas, because he has been in that office for so long, but I think he navigates the system in a way that I want to say really puts kind of the needs of the people of the district that he represents first, right? I think some of the limits that we kind of run into is oftentimes we could bring in legislation that is focused on the islands, on the territories, and then we've had members that have no clue where, what these islands are, what are the implications of these. And sometimes it works in favor in the sense that because they don't know, if they have good relations with the member, people would come and support, but otherwise sometimes it becomes labeled partisan. So I think in the scope of my work right now, it has been a big eye-opener to kind of just how bureaucracy works and how difficult it is to navigate. But definitely even just having conversations like this is difficult because it often gets labeled as political in the government realm, and with that, it takes us. Turns out we have to work twice as hard to get things passed sometimes, which is unfortunate, but yeah. Did I answer your question, or was there something specific that you wanted me to touch on? Yes.
No,
okay.
That's a perfect answer. I think that's a huge point and a huge perspective that I feel like a lot of folks may not be aware of, especially coming, from this very far area from the mainland, just to show, and yet having US governance there and not being represented, not being able to vote, having to work twice as hard, for that representation. I think it just says so much. And so I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that you share that with us, Katrina. Like, we really appreciate that you can share with us that perspective. I also wanted to ask our panelists, as we went through the history of, the treatment of Pacifica, of Native Hawaiians, like, in what ways do you see that same sentiment visible today? In your own lived experiences, whether in your own communities, in personal, we don't have to go that personal, but, just in your everyday lives, where can you feel the difference, or where can you see, these same themes continue on today?
To be clear, are we saying the themes like Aloha Aina, or are we saying the themes?
I think I think in terms of cultural appropriation or you know, colonialism, settler colonialism, or when we talk about you know, imperialism and things like that, or disregard or things like that. But I would be happy to hear about Aloha Aina if you want to talk about that too, Alika, for sure.
Okay, we can start with the colonialism side. I guess one of the biggest ways, like it feels, you still feel it in, you know, Pacifica diaspora and also back home is, I was startled to learn that 50% of all Native Hawaiian men are incarcerated either at home or abroad out here. So, I mean, like, it's not an uncommon story when you get to know someone to know that they have caged relatives. And yeah, just that connection between incarceration and settler colonialism is really, really pertinent. In our communities, but also our work, because like a lot of the research that I do looks at the ways that like, you know, kupuna, our elders, like looked out for us to make sure we wouldn't get like, you know, criminalized. And basically it's that intergenerational kind of looking out for each other, in the form of either guidance in youth activities is more structured, or just like sharing stories that might otherwise, you know, complicate what we know or are told to believe about, you know, um, who's there to protect us. Is it the police, or is it like, you know, our elders? Who do you go to when you have a problem? And just those little knowledges that you learn along the way kind of you know, reframe the way that we can avoid incarceration.
Well, Alika, I think I can honestly say that that's a statistic that I have not come across before. And I think that sheds a lot of light onto the just continuation of oppression there. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to add?
I think one I was thinking of was kind of the US's justification of like imperial action, in the sense that, for instance, Pacific Islanders are highly represented in military recruitment. You know, and even till now, recruiters often use the talking point of finding a better life and opportunity to recruit young Islanders to join the military. And I think with this, it still kind of goes back to the United States using kind of this act of, oh, we'll give you a little bit as a mask for, you know, their continued colonialism, their continued presence in the islands. So going back to kind of what I mentioned earlier about caution, being careful about when the United States gives us these little hints at, you know, opportunity of good, and just being, I think just thinking about, for example, in Guam and the Sinai, there's a big selling point of militarism as an economic incentive for these areas to persuade them into giving up land or space or resources for military bases, airfields, etc. And it just goes back to kind of the way the United States kind of slowly make their way into establishing power under the guise of, oh, this is good relations with us, but also opening up that window of when they, of, I think, like we've seen, right, once the United States really wants to do something, they often use these kind of little things that they give as reason to be like, oh, but we gave you this, give us more. Yeah.
Wow, Katrina, definitely. I think that theme of, you know, masking something that, you know, seems positive, but really it's, you know, just masking exploitation, you know, masking something much, you know, deeper and darker, I think, about the realities of, you know, militarism and in these islands, that it's all for use of benefit to the colonizer. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, for me, if you really look at it, it's, once again, I'm going to go back to the commodification extraction of land. The Pacific Oceanic people were rich in land. we're not poor. Like, and because we choose not to compete in this capitalistic system, but because some of our nations, I'm speaking from a Samoan perspective and what we deal with back home in Samoa specifically, is you see a lot of folks come on and try to negotiate, right? So hence the 1899, the act of the Berlin Act, that treaty that divided our territory. So American Samoa went to American territory, Western Samoa, which was once Western, went to Germany, and then we became independent in 1962. Native Hawaii, they told their story earlier with the Queen. And so when I look across our waters in Oceania, you see that with our Native Hawaiian brothers and sisters, because they've been deemed as a state, it's hard. Like Mauna Kea, we have movements like Mauna Kea going on, right? And then in comparative with our Native brothers and sisters here, that water is life. We all drink water. So I don't know why we're not getting behind that movement. And then Sister Katrina brought up a good point about military, right? And so if you look at some of these treaties and these negotiations, we have to remember that our people always came from a good place and space. We always had good medicine, right? And so when these colonial white settlers, European settlers, came onto our territory and they negotiated these treaties or whatever it may be, right? They used language as a form to dismantle our own system, right? And our people, because of the trust, were then forced to buy into this capitalistic system that is fairly brand new to a lot of us folks that are here in the United States. And I'm speaking for myself as a first gen. And instead of that spirit of reciprocity, right, and working as a collective, what's better for everybody, you now see this division and silo work that goes on, right? And so as my sister lady here is asking, what do you see? I see it in education. I see it in the dropout rates with our Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. I see it in the scarce resources offered to our people. You either go, to a different ethnic group to help you, or you figure it out, right? So still trying to remember, we're good enough to shed blood for a country, but we're not good enough to have full access to certain benefits, right? And so you also think about this issue with Pacific Islander in military, not really citizens and not really, so it's still, so that's where it shows up in immigration policies. The brother here spoke about criminalization of our brown and black bodies, right? And so if you really take a deep, hard look, you'll see it in the community. You see it in policymakers. You see people that don't look like us, that are writing about us, that need to fall back. So I just am here to state the truth and the current position of our people, and that we may be taking the long way to understand these systems, but it's going to be a good way because it's done with good medicine. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Wow, Lydia, just spot on. It's crazy. It's just wild how it's also deeply embedded in like society, in our systems, in ways that don't benefit these communities. And when you talk about reciprocity, and when you talk about using language as a way to manipulate, and kind of, I think in a large way, to gaslight these Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities, to make them believe that, like, we're looking out for you, or we know better than you, or that's the whole like colonizer mindset of being, of bringing in the idea that you're not taking care of yourself the way that you should be. And therefore I'm going to step in, take over, and also like, remove and exploit all of your resources, all of the good things you have. And I think it's, when you talk about like good medicine, Lydia, it's like, when I look back at all of these like in like communities and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, I think what's so beautiful to me is that they were fine. like they loved the land. They were in like good relations with the land. They had a spiritual connection and appreciation and value and worth, with the land that they lived on. And it's so beautiful to me whenever I look into it, or I hear about it, and I just see the culture. It's always something so beautiful to me, and it breaks me to see that government forces just swooped in and told them that and gave them such like language like savagery and uneducated and like not articulate, to make folks feel like they were not everything that they should be. Which is so not true. And it breaks my heart, honestly. And I'm really happy that we can have these conversations. And I think to kind of, we have any last things that we wanted to say, you know, just to, before we go into our resources portion, I just want to ask everyone, like, how important is your culture to you? Like, what does it mean to you to be connected to your ancestry, to be connected to your culture, to be connected to your land? What does that mean for you, coming from, you know, your perspective? I feel like some folks do not understand the impact that it means to them. So you feel free to let us know.
Just to start things off again, it's really important to me to be connected to, like, not just my culture, but to see how we're all collectively connected across difference. I guess one really heartful conversation I had recently was with a colleague who is native to the Northwest Coast, and basically we were talking about like native storytelling and how they have stories of us coming to them, and we have stories of them coming to us. And one of the kind of conclusions we came to with Pacifica broadly, not just what we consider Pacific Islands, but basically you can go thousands of miles and never leave home. And that's kind of heartwarming in a sense, where before I got here, my stories circulated here. Before I got here, my ancestors circulated here, not just my human ancestors, but my plant, animal, and like land and water ancestors are with me at all times. And just knowing that is poetic and beautiful, and also gives us a way to forge solidarities against colonialism, and think of our connections in struggle beyond just shared violences. It's not just this shorter, like maybe 5-century history. It's this boundless kind of ongoing history of Native connection that sometimes, like, we have to just remind ourselves of, just because so part of the colonial project was erasing those knowledges and erasing those connections.
Thank you so much, Alika.
For myself, on the question of the importance of staying connected to culture, for me, it's super important. It's really why I moved back. All of my immediate family are here, and I think our culture has evolved into something that is rooted in kind of the values and beliefs that we have from my Filipino side, staying close to my grandmother, staying close to those connections while being in the diaspora, but also acknowledging that because I think my roots are here in the Marianas, I really don't know any other place to call home. Thinking about how growing up here has influenced me and staying connected to kind of the way that culture has kind of shaped my life too. So something I really think about is just the element of respect that's really carried here, element of respect and really seeing everyone in the community as your family, as someone to show up for and to help out when they need. And coming back, the action of really leaving the States again and coming back to what I call home, to me is really, for myself, a further exploration of what it means to be connected to my identity as a Filipino in the Northern Marianas. Thank you.
That is beautiful, Katrina. So beautiful. I think respect is a huge part of this conversation, right? It's really about putting in the effort to look out for this community properly in the way that they want to be respected, and to really put in the work to know what that's like. And so it's just so beautiful to hear that. Lydia, if you wanted to share.
Yeah, for me, it's so back home in Samoa, in my lived experience, what culture and land and value, and how much I value my ancestors and those who came before me. Alika touched on it with relationships from time immemorial between all of our people. Somewhere along the line, our ancestors connected, right? And so as I think about, Lady, your question, I want everybody to basically like close your eyes and think about which land you're on, right? And imagine that your ancestors are buried on that land. The next thing you know, they're being excavated because there needs to be a forestry built there. They need to put in a tall building, right? That then destroys the next 7 generations who are supposed to inherit that birthright, right? And so that's how much love and value I place on my land back home in Samoa. That's how much love and value I place here when I stand in solidarity with our Coast Salish tribes, because I understand. You know, there's a saying that my grandfather used to say, to tell me growing up, and we would go back home, you know, when we can afford it. And he would tell me, once you're rooted, you're always going to be rooted no matter how far away you are from home, right? But your responsibility wherever you lay your roots to continue this work, you must honor the indigenous people of that land as they are dealing with the same issues that we are dealing with back home in our indigenous, my indigenous homeland. So that's how I want to paint it for everybody, is that when we look at things going on in the United States, whether you're positioned in the United States or you're like our sister Katrina here or in the Mariana Islands, you think about those folks that are laid to rest on those ancestral home ground, and why Mauna Kea and the movement and why these movements are important to our indigenous people. So the value for me, it's a lifetime. It was instilled in me, and I instill it in the next generation that is coming in. So thank you.
Beautiful, Lydia. I think it definitely, you know, your words and your perspective really allow us to really intrinsically search, you know, for something that's deeper with all of us. And I think, you know, it's so beautiful to just hear, you know, like this thought process and, you know, bringing it to everyone else here in the audience. And I'm so glad that we could all hear these words from all of you. So thank you all for that quick little talking points portion. We're gonna move into the resources moment, which will be given by our VP, our National VP of Education and Culture, Emilio Manuel Camus.
Boy, everyone. My name is Emilio, Tagalog Bicol non-Filipino, coming to you from the lands of the Goshu, Shoshone, and Ute. And a little disclaimer, this is the resources part, and it was compiled by our amazing team here, as well as our panelists. And it is a non-exhaustive list of the organizations and the things that we can do. And so we'll start off, right? What can we do? Inform yourself of Hawaiian history and the perspective from the Kanaka Maoli or the Kanaka Oiwi. Support local businesses of the Kanaka Maoli, Kanaka Oiwi, or Native Hawaiians in your area. Support the disaggregation of data, right? I think for us, we're lucky in the state of Utah that we, separate Asian and Pacific Islanders so that we see the different disparities affecting our communities. But not every state, not every location, not every region does that. Find your local Hawaiian civic club, right? And support their cause wherever there are Hawaiians, right? In the mainland or elsewhere, there will be a civic club fighting for sovereignty of the Hawaiian people. Vote for Native Hawaiian-Pacific Islander representation in government. Take it even further and make sure that these people are rooted and are answering to the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. Hear Native Hawaiian voices by watching, this is for Alika. Alika, I'll hand these two off to you.
All right, so I guess there's two films here. They're both graciously provided by their directors on YouTube. So if you just copy and paste those in, Standing Above the Clouds and This is the Way We Rise, they both chronicle the Kia'i movement currently on Mauna Kea that we kind of alluded to here. And largely we're standing in community with our land against the construction of a 30-meter telescope on the summit of Mauna Kea. So both of those pretty much outline the intergenerational, largely queer and women-led struggle that's going on right now up there. So please do go watch those too. And then La Ho'i Ho'i Ea, or Hawaiian Sovereignty Restoration Day, is coming up on July 31st. So back in 1843, a British lord by the name of George Paulet seized the sovereignty of our islands from Kamehameha III, and on July 31st, I guess Admiral Richard Thomas came and restored our sovereignty to us, and we've kind of have celebrated that holiday continuously since 1843, and now it takes on further significance in our ongoing sovereignty struggles. So a lot of the events that are happening across you know, the mainland and Hawaii, but largely if you go to laho'iho'i'ea.org, you'll see all the ways you can get involved on the island of Oahu primarily. Yeah, it's just a month long of reflection on what ea or sovereignty means to us.
Thank you, Alika.
Furthermore, what we can do is get involved in our local resources. This is specifically for the state of Washington. The Asian Pacific Cultural Center of Washington is one. The Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs, on which Sis Lydia Faitalia is on, correct? Or maybe it's a different commission. Okay, yeah, that's the same commission. Then there's also the United Indians of All Tribes Foundation, the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, Utopia, Washington for the Pacific Islander LGBTQIA+ community, and the Pacific Islander Health Board of Washington. And from the state of Utah, the National Tongan American Society, the Utah Pacific Islander Health Coalition, the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement Coalition, as well as Hui Hawaii o Utah. And that's a non-exhaustive list, right? And that's an introductory list to everyone who is wanting to be further engaged in the Native Hawaiian-Pacific Islander communities. But in order to, you know, fully engaged, right, continue to educate yourself and make sure that you're building relationships, right? This is not just a one-time, you know, allyship. I'm gonna come support you for this one time. No, this is a lifelong commitment to each other in this collective struggle for all sovereignty for all people.
Thank you so much, Kuya Emilio. So I hope those resources really helped folks to have a better idea of the things that we can do, whether we consider we're part of the NHPA community or not. There's something that we can all do to contribute to these communities, to help our brothers and sisters that we have learned the history of now, and kind of have a more better reason to love better, right? So with that being said, we will go into our Q&A portion, and feel free to use the Q&A little button thing on the bottom if you have any questions. And I know we're also running a little bit over time, I think, because we started late. I hope that's okay with everyone. So I have a great question here. So it says, when teaching about the often forgotten and marginalized histories of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, how do we ensure accuracy of the histories taught in terms of oppression and all the isms, e.g. racism, imperialism, capitalism, but also center the joy, strength, and resilience within these communities as well? I find that a lot of the history taught about marginalized peoples, when it's taught, often paint us as victims of exploitation, colonization, and do not tell the richness of our stories and experiences. That's a beautiful question and very true. So I'd love to hear what panelists think.
That's a heavy question. That's a heavy question. I can talk about that forever. We can unpack that forever. Talk about intersectionality and all this stuff. But I'm gonna give you the short answer because we are on time limits. And lady, you don't have to apologize. We're on NHPI time. Don't worry about it. So for me, and this is just from my experiences, and those of you that are educators, right? And if you see that, right, you advocate. And so what I've seen a lot of my friends I went to college with, what they'll do is they'll take up space in ethnic studies, right? And then they'll call community leaders in to teach the true history, right? And it then opens up the imagination of all our students, right? Because we want to make sure that we're not only targeting a specific, we want to open it up to everybody, because everybody is watching the stereotypes of our people, but it's a way to bring in leaders and healers, right? So when you're in a position like that, bring in community members and leaders to teach, to help you teach those classes, the true history, but at the same time with your power, use your platform to advocate for more educators that look like us, right? And I see it from time and time again, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the first step is take up space and look if there's any Native Hawaiian Pacific founders you can work with, and just like Brother Emilio mentioned, build those relationships and that trust, and you'll be good, right? So that's my response.
Thinking on that very salient question, kind of brought me back to some of the organizing my previous ethnic studies department back at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo did, centering Black Lives Matter. Is like, it's good to be out in support for, like, you know, large movements like Black Lives Matter, but also what are you doing to improve Black life? Like, not just the lives of people, but what are you doing to improve Black life? So kind of take that to another angle for our current audience. Like, what are you doing to improve, like, PI life? So basically going in, bringing community to you, especially when you have the institutional administrative resources to compensate those elders for their knowledge and mana'o. Definitely paints a different picture, and allows people to see, like, Native life and Native joy. So that's kind of one way to get out of those spiraling, like, declensionist narratives of, like, you know, decline of Native experiences, by showing that we're here. By the numbers, actually, there's over 1 million Native Hawaiians worldwide. Similarly, like, so that means if you look at, I guess, estimates from pre-colonial encounters, there's more of us now. Like, so, like, finding examples of Native life is kind of what's important, and I'm sure, like, the experience is replicated across the Pacific. So meaning, like, Native life doesn't just have to be, like, cultural practices from the past. It can be ongoing things like, oh, what about the UH-BYU rivalry in football? Has that been going on? A little bit less so now, but I mean, like, look for things that really, like, speak to your local communities, to kind of talk about. Yeah.
I don't have much to add to that, but both Lydia and Alika's answers kind of took me back to the time when I was in undergrad still. I think one of the things that my professors would do was really encourage their students to go out to these events, or for instance, we had, like, during my time with the Pacific Islander Student Commission at the UW, we would do a quarterly open mic that featured our Pacific Islander students. So professors would actively encourage students to show up to those, to kind of see what are the things that bring the community joy, and to show up in that way. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kat. Yeah, I think it's a huge part is just showing up, right? That's a huge part of it. It's very simple. It's very foundational. Just, it's not like just showing face to be there, but it's showing up and being there, being present, and actively listening. You know, it's, I think a huge part of solidarity that I've learned is, like, humility, is that it's not all about you. It is about those that you are listening to and advocating for. And so thank you all. These are beautiful answers. We have another question. There are, and I don't know much about this, like, on an immigration or like but there are many Pacific Islanders that are not allowed to be U.S. citizens. What can we do about it?
I can answer that. I think depending on what island nation we're talking about, because everybody has different territorial rights, right? So American Samoa, they're free to travel back and forth. Native Hawaiians are deemed American citizens. My apologies if I misspoken, Brother Alika. But for those born in what is considered Western Samoa or Tonga, right, then they would be considered illegal immigrants if they enter through the water, if they swim or however many miles across the ocean. A lot of our folks come here for better opportunities because of what is going on in our homelands, and some by force, right? And so to help and support, it's just like operating in the United States immigration policies, and that's what I want to get to, is that they have to apply as do the process of the United States. And so a lot of times when we do get cases like that, because I work a lot in the community, what we do is we have a person down at Northwest Project that handles, so you have to find, if you do know folks like that, right, that are undocumented, or they're concerned about their visa and they're Native Hawaiian-Pacific Islanders or immigrants, period, right? Make sure that you connect with the trusted agency that could help with their paperwork. You may need, a lot of times I see that they need a lot of translations, and we all know how the system works. Don't nobody got money to fund PI translators. So that's another point of advocacy I like to push for everybody. So anyways, so if you see that folks in immigration needs it, make sure that check if that person needs resources. And the reason why I tell you is because if you were trusted for somebody to tell you that, that means they're going to trust you with the process, which means that you have to be accountable to the community member. Make sure that they have a translator, a trusted translator, and that there's a community leader that's going to be working with you on the side of that. So that's just
piggybacking on Lydia's really good answer. Translation services extends beyond like, you know, food security and legal advice and immigration status, but also into our hospitals. A lot of time, especially undocumented peoples, have a hard time receiving care, not just for lack of insurance, but language. Language definitely, especially indigenous languages that are not common. I know in California, like indigenous Central American, like being able to speak like Oaxacan, or being able to speak like, you know, languages indigenous to places that have been colonized by Spanish folks. People assume, oh, you're from Guatemala, you should be able to speak Spanish, but oftentimes there are lapses in care due to that translation issue.
I think when I looked at this question, I was kind of problematizing the idea of U.S. citizenship a little bit. I think it's also important to recognize that U.S. citizenship is often sought because of the benefits it brings people, in the sense that these are benefits that were created because of the very presence of the United States in these areas. And I think what I've seen is, for individuals who are living in the United States not as citizens, oftentimes they become, they are not able to access kind of public resources that are made available to them, right? So a lot of my work has been to kind of address these gaps in the sense that nonprofits and kind of immigration assistance agencies, like Lydia mentioned, are really big actors in this realm. So if people are trying to seek immigration services, to make sure you look out, as Lydia said earlier, for trusted individuals who can help you with that. But if you are someone who does not necessarily want US citizenship, but you need the help that is extended to US citizens, I think that's when kind of community and I want to say like kind of allyship shows up in that way, connecting these individuals with resources that can address things like food security. If it's because they can't access pandemic resources, for example, connect them with nonprofits who are filling in those gaps. Yeah.
I'm gonna add a little something too for the person that asked this question. I think maybe you also were referring to COFA impacted communities. So right, the Compact of Free Association, the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. To Ate Katrina was mentioning some of the public resources, right? Medicare, Medicaid recently, right, was finally overturned after what, 2.5 decades, but also still Pell Grant and financial aid for students, or for people that were born on these islands and migrated to the mainland, right? I think something that you can do, everyone else has mentioned, is follow the community and what community leaders are pushing to do.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your wisdom. I honestly would not have been able to answer that question. So I'm so happy all of you are here. And we are really pushing that time. So I think we can wrap up. And I'm gonna let panelists kind of say one last message before we sign off. If anyone wants to start, Alika, you've been starting all night. Up to you if you want to go again. But if anyone wants to go.
Okay, I'll go again. Yeah, no, mahalo nui loa, talofa. Just like my hands go up in gratitude and praise. I mean, this community, like, you know, openly embraced me. I just met most of you this week, and it's been really generative to hear your experiences. So yeah, no, this has just also been a pleasure on my end. So thank you.
I just want to say thank you to OCA National and also to Alika and Lydia. It has been amazing sharing this space with you, I think, and just learning from you too. I really miss that feeling of being around individuals who can kind of share experiences like this. So it was, I don't know, it was great for me to meet both of you and to hear from you. So thank you. And to thank you to everyone who tuned in too. There is really so much to learn about the history of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, but there's also so much to celebrate today. So I encourage everyone to really learn more and also show up when you can. And yeah, thank you.
I just want to say Fafitai and Malole to first shout out to OCA, Lady and Emilio for being accountable to our communities and strengthening our relationships across, yeah. And so I want to say thank you both for it takes courage to do this, right? Especially in the time of racism and hate. Right. And so I want to say thank you. And then I see 32 participants, and I just want to say that you are now part of the advocacy for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. And I'm going to ask Brother Emilio and Sister Lady to send us your name and contact. So when I see you in the community and you're not paying it forward, I'm like, you remember that call we were on, that OCA? But you know, I like to joke around a lot, but in all seriousness, right, I just want to say OCA, my brother and sister here, thank you for hosting us. I've extended my larger family to Brother Alika and Katrina. Now we are all bonded by this circle, right? And so I want to encourage our communities to love on one another and also not play into lateral oppression and oppression Olympics, and take the good and leave the bad, right? So we can collectively move this work and be accountable to each other, be upfront if something's not right, you know, put some good medicine on it. So I am here, I'm available. My sister lady has my contact. Sorry if I don't answer your call, but I will always return your call. Give me a week. But I just want you to know we are now part of the collective family. So thank you very much, community, for hosting this important conversation.
Okay, Emilio, did you want to say anything? No? Just wanted to see. He said salamat. Well, everyone, thank you so much. This was such a beautiful and insightful night of history. History means so much to me because I think it's so important to learn from, you know, not only the events, but of, you know, mistakes, to learn of victories and things that work, what doesn't work, in order to move forward as a better community. I think these conversations, just unpacking these heavy topics with the right people, with the right communities, are just so important. And so I really, truly thank our panelists here tonight, Alika, Katrina, Lydia. Your presence here means so much to me, it means so much to OCA, and just for all of our communities together to really solidify this solidarity. For anyone asking, we will be this is recorded, so we will be posting it on our YouTube channel in a little bit, in a few, once I get like the recording and all this other stuff. We do have more API history webinars in the future. We're focusing on hate crimes in history this year. So be sure to follow OCA National on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything. Be sure to check out all the resources to support all my brothers and sisters sharing this call. To all of our communities and all of the movements and causes that we're here for. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns, comments, anything. My info is on ocanational.org and all other things. So yes, I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your solidarity and taking the moment to really learn and to talk about these things. And I hope you all have a great night. Good night. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.